You might want to go through this video more than once, or stop somewhere in the middle and come back to it later. The video has lots of information. To make it a bit shorter, the final part is a series of slides that appear briefly on the screen with text. The slides have details about the things I talk about in the video. The first three parts of this video are about tools that help with all anxiety disorders. The fourth part is about helping people to overcome phobias, fears that keep people from living healthy lives. As I said, the final part is text on the screen. You'll see information about resources along with some nice music. I'll say something about a very special resource, the Anxiety and Phobia Workbook by Edmund Bourne. The book by Dr. Bourne has a 5-star rating in Authoritative Guide to Self-Help Resources in Mental Health, a book based on polls of more than 3,000 professionals. This is the only book for anxiety I'll mention in this video. The author provides his own book recommendations at the ends of his chapters. I see no need to add recommendations of my own to those of Dr. Bourne. Anxiety makes things seem worse than they are. It puts thoughts that worry us in our minds. Worrying is not thinking. It's just going around in circles. Thinking solves problems, and solving problems is good for anxiety. The nervous system has what's sometimes called the fight or flight state. This has certain advantages, but it doesn't really help us with problem solving. There are body functions associated with fight or flight. We can't control any of these functions except one: breathing. A change in our breathing affects the other body functions and our mood. A change of breathing can take us to the opposite of fight or flight, known as rest and digest. It's a welcome change, giving us a sense of security. It's good for problem solving. The thinking part of the brain likes rest and digest. A particular nerve, the vagus nerve, communicates with all the parts of the body associated with these two states. There's a number of things we can do to stimulate the vagus nerve for a sense of security. Changing the way we breathe is a very simple and effective way. It's something we can do anytime. We can do it when we're alone, when we're at a meeting, or when we're sitting in a stadium with thousands of people. The most effective way is breathing with the diaphragm, the big muscle under the stomach. You can know that this muscle is doing its job by putting a hand on your belly and feeling it go out as you inhale and go in when you exhale. Psychiatrists Richard Brown and Patricia Gerbarg recommend a simple breathing exercise. Breathe gently, 6 seconds in and 6 seconds out. They say that 10 minutes of that exercise is good, and 20 minutes at bedtime and early morning is a therapy for anxiety. Belly breathing helps us to think our way through a scary situation instead of just worrying about it. We can think about the worst that can happen and how likely that is. We can think about what we can do if it does happen. Anxiety magnifies our problems. It makes our problems seem bigger than they are. There's an old saying, don't make mountains out of molehills. In a stressful situation, we can think about the different ways we can respond and decide which one is the most intelligent. Here's a good habit. Respond to a moment of stress with slow breathing. A very simple way to deal with a negative thought is to replace it with at least 2 positive thoughts. Think about the good things you have and the good things you've done. Having a good time is therapy for anxiety. Therapist and lifestyle expert Steve Ilardi talks about enjoyable ways to get exercise: long walks with family and friends, sports and swimming. Moderate exercise is good for us mentally and physically. Dr. Ilardi cites evidence that a few minutes of exercise a day can have a positive effect on our moods. A problem with exercise is that people can push themselves too far, make themselves sick of exercise with too much and quit. And pushing ourselves too hard can be dangerous. Before you start on an exercise regimen, talk with your doctor. A brisk walk in the fresh air and sunlight for as little as 20 minutes a day is good. If you're out of shape, you can start with less than that. Walk for 5 minutes and add to that gradually. Having a good time is therapy for anxiety. An activity that gets you involved, like a hobby that's fun and interesting, is great. If you're looking for a hobby, I'll tell you about sites that give you hundreds of suggestions. The Mind Body Green website has the article Looking for a New Hobby. It lists more than 170 hobbies. Reddit, known as the heart of the internet, has sections for just about every topic. The section Our Hobbies has so many things in its hobby list that I wouldn't try to count them all. The hobbies are in alphabetical order. From A to C, acting to camping, there's more than 300. Think of a tree with roots deep in the ground. If a storm tosses the upper branches of the tree back and forth, the tree is stable. Feeling grounded is feeling stable and secure. Feeling grounded is feeling confident. It's having our 2 feet on the ground, ready for whatever comes our way in the topsy-turvy world of bad news, stress, and anxiety. To feel grounded, relax, focus on the present moment, and think carefully. A way to think of this grounding triad is to picture a circle, one thing leading to the next. This video tells you about ways to relax, with special attention to the traditional Asian methods recommended by therapists. Relaxation makes us feel good. Relaxation can be very helpful in a moment of crisis, a time when it seems that the world has been turned upside down and things seem hopeless. Relaxation helps us to focus on the present moment, focus on the task at hand. A good example of how focus can help us is the story of U.S. Airlines Flight 1549 from LaGuardia Airport. They called it the Miracle on the Hudson. The plane lost both engines. The pilot put the plane down on the Hudson River. Passengers and crew evacuated successfully. A pilot's ability to stay calm in a very dangerous situation like this owes much to a principle of neurology. We have a set of physical responses associated with being afraid, and another set of physical responses associated with being focused on a task. It's impossible for these 2 sets to be active at the same time. When we're in the focus set, we can't be in the fear set. A scientist named Alexander Luria proved that in the early part of the 20th century. That's how a pilot is able to remain calm while making an emergency landing. So long as the pilot's nervous system is in the focus set, it's literally impossible for the pilot to be afraid. Of course, there's a lot of things we can focus on besides emergency landings, things that are fun and interesting. Careful thinking quiets our fear. In his article, Thinking and Breathing to Calm the Body's Emergency Response, psychologist Robert Levine talks about how the thinking part of the brain quiets the brain's fire alarm, the part of the brain that alerts us to dangers, the amygdala. Careful thinking quiets our fear. 10 years ago, Time magazine had a cover article, The Mindful Revolution, about how modern psychology has adopted the traditional Asian practice known as mindfulness. Western psychology has been shaped by scientific study of mindfulness. An advantage of using mindfulness in daily life is that when we're aware of changes in our stress level, that can prompt us to use our coping methods, slow down and slow our breathing to keep our mood on track. A common misconception about mindfulness is that it's hard. Jon Kabat-Zinn, who developed the program Mindfulness-Based Stress Reduction, has said if there's anything hard about mindfulness, it's forming the habit of using it. The resources section of this video has a caution from the Oxford University Mindfulness Center about different ways that mindfulness is taught. Their article tells you about the safest way to learn. Mindfulness can help, but it's not for everybody. The Oxford article points out that there's a variety of good relaxation methods. The book by Edmund Bourne has details about a fast way to get started with mindfulness. It's what psychologists call interoception, in plain English, body awareness. Awareness of our breathing as we breathe slowly, and awareness of our muscles as we relax them, are part of traditional meditation. When we control our breathing and relax our muscles, we can focus on the body's sensations, focus on the present moment. One benefit of this is relief from an anxiety symptom called hyperventilation. When we're upset, we breathe a certain way, very fast or very deeply. This can make it seem that we're not getting enough air. It can be scary, but it's not dangerous. The way to breathe if we have this problem is the way I showed you. Breathing slowly with the belly, feeling it swell with the in-breath. Two ways of relaxing the muscles are gentle stretching and body scans. The easiest approach to gentle stretching is following one of the beginner's videos for learning Tai Chi exercise. There's information about Tai Chi in the resource section of my video. YouTube has the body scan audio John Kabat-Zinn recorded for the University of Massachusetts Medical Center. Dr. Bourne recommends the work of this pioneering researcher. PMR, progressive muscle relaxation, is another body scan method. Doctors have been recommending PMR since the 1930s. The information about PMR in the resources section has a caution from the U.S. Veterans Administration. PMR can help, but it's not for everybody. The Tools for Living section begins with anxiety and anxiety disorders, with information about when to get professional help. After that, there's information about help from others and lifestyle. Then, briefly, something about a topic Dr. Bourne talks about in detail: personal meaning, living with a sense of purpose. In her Healthline article, Signs and Symptoms of Anxiety Disorders, Erica Jolson says anxiety is a very normal response to stressful life events like moving, changing jobs, or having financial troubles. However, when anxiety symptoms become larger than the events that trigger them and begin to interfere with your life, they could be signs of an anxiety disorder. The article has details about things that suggest an anxiety disorder: excessive worrying, restlessness, fatigue, and difficulty concentrating. Regardless of how long you've been experiencing symptoms, says Jolson, if you ever feel like your emotions are interfering with your life, you should seek professional help. Licensed psychologists and psychiatrists can treat anxiety disorders through a variety of methods. Friendship is very important. A friend can take our minds off things that worry us. Friends can help us when we're suffering from anxiety, but friends are friends and therapists are therapists. Therapy should be left to the professionals, the people with training and experience for treating anxiety disorders. By the way, if you have a problem with social anxiety or a problem with making friends, there's helpful information for these problems in the resources section. For more than one reason, seeing a doctor is often a very good idea. The symptoms of a serious physical illness can imitate the symptoms of anxiety. If there is a serious physical illness, that's something that should not be ignored. On the other hand, it's reassuring when a doctor says it's only anxiety. A doctor may be able to recommend a good clinical psychologist or psychiatrist. People who think that they can't afford therapy are often surprised. The cost of therapy can vary a lot. A doctor or a social worker may be able to provide information about this. The Psychology Today online feature Find a Therapist has information about local therapists. If there's a number of therapists in your area, you might want to contact more than one to find out whether or not a therapist accepts your insurance. Online therapy offers a less expensive therapy option. Healthline has an article that rates online therapy services. Forbes magazine says Open Path Psychotherapy Collective is a nonprofit mental health service that makes quality therapy accessible to underserved populations. A good support group can be very helpful for people suffering from anxiety, but the quality of support groups varies. Help Guide has an excellent article about support groups. The article tells you about the red flags of an unproductive group. If something feels off, the article says, it probably is. A good support group has structure, clear guidelines, and a good facilitator, someone with proper training, someone who can put people at ease and help the group to stay on track. Authoritative Guide to Self-Help Resources in Mental Health, mentioned earlier in this video, rates books, films, and websites with ratings based on polls of more than 3,000 professionals. It has details about support groups in its anxiety disorders chapter and details about support groups in its chapters on obsessive-compulsive disorder and post-traumatic stress disorder, a total of 10 groups. You can read about them in the resources section of the video. Of course, you can also find support groups with an internet search typing support groups for anxiety near me or support groups for anxiety online. I'd like to mention a support group that offers the 3 features recommended in the Help Guide article. Recovery International has been helping people for generations. You can read details about the history of recovery and its methods in the resources section of this video. YouTube has a video with quotations from Recovery's founder, Dr. Abraham Lowe. I've shown you tools for feeling grounded. For a healthy lifestyle, use the feeling grounded tools in daily life. Here's advice to help you with forming good habits. Psychiatrists Richard Brown and Patricia Gerbarg say that most adults read faster than the ideal rate. They say that when we're born, we're great at breathing. But as we grow, our breathing rate goes up, most likely because of stress. A good way to get started on a better breathing rate during the day is with a breathing exercise. Brown and Gerbarg say that using their breathing exercise for 20 minutes at bedtime and 20 minutes in the early morning is therapy for anxiety. This is the breathing exercise I told you about earlier in this video with the illustration of belly breathing. To use this slow breathing rate more often, form the habit of responding to a moment of stress by breathing slowly. Wearing tight clothing that restricts your breathing or sitting so that you can't breathe properly, something office workers often do, is not healthy. Let yourself breathe freely. I've told you about slow, gentle stretching. I've found that 5 minutes of relaxing Tai Chi exercise is helpful, and 5 minutes twice a day is better. Form habits of slow movement in daily life. Sometimes we have to rush, but a lot of the time we don't. Slow movement in daily life is the friend of people who suffer from anxiety. You may have heard the old saying, haste makes waste. It's very old. Benjamin Franklin said it and people before him. Doing things carelessly and rushing when we don't have to leads to mistakes and accidents. What's more, it's bad for anxiety. When you're at the top of the basement stairs and when you're operating dangerous machinery, take it slowly and carefully. Knowing that you actually are safe is a great way to enhance your sense of safety. Carefulness is a kind of mindfulness. Take things one at a time so that you can devote your full attention to the task at hand. A way to get out of the rushing habit is listening to your footsteps. If you hear stomping, that tells you to slow down. The way to deal with ideas that bother us is to think about them carefully. Here are 3 examples of Edmund Bourne's advice for challenging the beliefs that make anxiety worse. I'm hopeless, a victim. Challenge that with, I can decide how to feel about my circumstances. I must not fail. Challenge that with, I'm always learning from my mistakes. Life is a struggle. Challenge that with, life is more than a struggle. Director Steven Spielberg had what seemed to be bad luck while he was filming his blockbuster movie Jaws. His mechanical shark was nearly impossible to work with. It was constantly breaking down. After giving the problem some thought, it occurred to him that a shark the audience could not see would be scarier. When things don't go as planned, look for the possible advantages of the new situation. Look for ways to make lemonade out of the lemons life gives you, the big ones and all the small ones of daily life. Use your imagination and you can make your own luck. I'd like to add this about the idea that life is a struggle. Psychology has methods that, for generations, have been helping people to overcome motivation problems and get things done. I mentioned Dr. Abraham Lowe, the founder of Recovery International. His common sense methods for helping people to get things done in daily life are explained in a video on this channel, Motivation and Mental Health. The resources section tells you about 2 books with advice for forming good habits, The Willpower Instinct by Kelly McGonigal and Atomic Habits by James Clear. It also has details about the works of 2 authors with lifestyle advice based on scientific research. Therapist and researcher Steve Ilardi, who headed a university project to develop a lifestyle program, and nutritionist Felice Jacka, founder and director of the Mood and Food Center of Deakin University. The authors I just mentioned have good advice for dealing with the sense of frustration that often comes with forming habits. Remember what psychiatrist Abraham Lowe told his patients: be a patient patient. Bourne's chapter on personal meaning says that although an anxiety disorder may be caused by a number of factors, it sometimes reflects a sense that one's life has no direction. Of course, this is very complicated. I'll just say that the book by Dr. Bourne has interesting thoughts about finding purpose and gaining peace of mind and self-confidence. Phobias are fears that keep people from living healthy lives. The phobia treatment used most often by therapists is exposure to what is feared. Edmund Bourne explains 3 types of exposure. Exposure therapy is complicated, but the basic idea is very simple. Gradual exposure begins by making a list of situations, ranking them in order of how challenging they are, and using the ranked list as a set of objectives. A list of objectives can start with coping exposure. After that, there can be full exposure. Having someone with you for support is an example of coping exposure. Bourne has a list of objectives that can be used for overcoming a fear of shopping at a supermarket. 10 objectives for coping exposure and another 10 for full exposure. The first objective is drive there with a support person and spend 1 minute in the parking lot. The second objective is like the first, but the time is 5 or 10 minutes. The third objective is entering the supermarket with the support person and walking around for 2 minutes. The next 10 objectives for full exposure are more challenging. In the full exposure list, the support person is not there, but the list of objectives begins with the use of an anxiety management strategy, such as belly breathing. Remember that this should be gradual. If an objective is too difficult, the thing is to slow down. You can simply return to the previous objective and keep working at that level until you're completely confident with it. Overcoming a phobia often calls for patience and persistence. Imagery exposure is exposure that consists of imagining feared situations. This method is useful when exposure in real life is not practical. For example, when someone has a fear of interviews. The idea is learning to be relaxed while imagining situations that are more and more challenging. At first, someone can imagine an interview in which all the questions are easy. Later, there can be exercises in which the questions are more and more difficult. Someone with a fear of interviews can use a good relaxation method during the imagery exposure and in real life, breathing slowly shortly before the interview and during the interview. Knowing what's happening in the body is called interoception. Bourne's chapter on panic attacks tells how people can learn not to fear their panic symptoms by making them happen. For example, someone can make shortness of breath happen by breathing through a drinking straw. To do this safely, talk with a doctor about this. Again, exposure is complicated. To get a good understanding of it, read what Dr. Bourne says. By the way, Bourne has advice for people who worry too much about minor health problems, what's called health anxiety or hypochondria. He says that people can deal with their obsessive thoughts with exercise, relaxation, music, talking with friends about something other than their worrisome thoughts, and distractions such as movies and interesting hobbies like arts and crafts.